Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm joining you from the Fraser Valley office of the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC, located here in Chilliwack on the traditional and unceded territories of the Stolo Coast Salish people. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak to you from these shared lands here today. A little bit about the Alliance for those that don't know us. The Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC is a not-for-profit health and safety association for manufacturers and food processors in British Columbia. Our team of health and safety experts is here to answer your questions and to assist you towards core certification, the Occupational Safety Standard of Excellence, OSCE, for manufacturing. At the Alliance, we're here to support the continuous improvement of your health and safety programs to prevent injuries and promote workplace wellness. Please call us anytime for health and safety training, information, tools, or advice. Today, we'll be talking about technology, the use of it, and what it will mean for our facilities and how it affects the way we need to assess future risks to our teams. In the manufacturing and food processing sector, leading employers have invested in technological advances to improve production while reducing many health and safety risks for workers. The two most prevalent injuries in our sector occur from injuries related to MSIs induced by repetition and overexertion, or being struck by or caught in equipment. These two categories represent 66% of all injuries in our sector. So today, businesses are using technology as an effective strategy to reduce the number of workers hurt on the job due to these hazards. Technology investments in digitalization, automation, robotics, and AI are reshaping production facilities by eliminating hazardous jobs and potentially making manufacturing jobs more interesting and engaging. But these changes are also creating an increased demand for new skills, retraining, and of course, a need for risk assessments to evaluate the hazards introduced from these technological adaptations. And for many in the sector, technological upgrades like these still remain out of reach, especially for small business, where the majority of business remains in BC. For many medium to large size operations, a diversity of needs and rapid shift creates a unique challenge for both health and safety professionals and business leaders in our industry. Joining us here today on this panel discussion are Jason Longden from Fine Choice Foods and Bill Geoffroy from Meatree Incorporated, two BC companies that have bet heavily on the potential of automation to drive productivity while making their workplaces safer. We're also joined by Rachel Franklin from the Strategic Projects Office in the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills, here to share more information on the new programs and funding earmarked for manufacturers in the Stronger BC Future Ready Action Plan. We'll start by discussing some of the investments our panelists have made in technology and some of the new programs available to support employers in this area. And then, of course, we'll shift our discussion to the health and safety impact of those changes, as well as the changes in the overall risk profiles. We'll also make time for your questions here from the audience. Please use the Q&A icon at any time to ask your question. But first, let's meet our panelists. Thank you all once again for joining us today in this timely and an important discussion. First, Jason and Bill, please take a few minutes to introduce yourselves and your businesses and share a bit about some of the factors that have contributed to the decision to invest in technology. Please also include some of the risk areas in your facilities that influence your adoption of technology. Starting with you, Jason.
Good morning. Just have to unmute that. Good morning, Lisa. Thank you for the invite to participate today. My name is Jason Longden. I'm the CEO at Fine Choice Foods. We are a manufacturer of Asian-inspired cuisine out in Richmond, British Columbia. Company's been around for 36, 37 years now. We have a workforce of around about 370 and two facilities in the Richmond community. I think just looking at automation and what we've tried to look at is we make a lot of spring rolls by hand. And there's a lot of MSI risk that comes along with that. And so when we were designing the new facility, we invested heavily in looking at automating that risk out as a testing point, with a view to potentially in the future looking at rolling that into the existing facility. So I would say that's what our biggest focus has been on automation so far for the last year or so. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Jason, for joining us. Bill.
Well, thank you for inviting me. My name is Bill Jeffroy. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Manufacturing for Matrix. We're a privately held millwork business that started in Vancouver in 1926. As I was saying earlier with some folks, our original manufacturing plant is now what would be Olympic Village. And where we used to make moldings, they have a very trendy craft beer bar there today. So big change from when we were making dust back there 100 years ago. Today, we service most of North America from 28 distribution centers that go from Vancouver to Orlando, from Halifax to California. And we have 6 manufacturing businesses, one of them being right here in the Lower Mainland in Surrey, all in the millwork business. We've been investing in technology really for 3 risk areas. One of them was the gap in the available general labor. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, we had a lot of material handlers, and that is not, I think you said the word interesting job, that is not a destination job. And those jobs have become more and more difficult to fill in the last 10 years. To automate some of our skilled labor in our plants to improve and standardize our quality as we continue to compete against products that are coming from offshore, and to increase our capabilities to support the lack of skilled labor for our customers. Our customers have come back and said, hey, we need more finished product because we can't do the work in the field. And that's where we've been targeting our technology spend.
Excellent. Thank you both for your introductions. Now let's turn to Rachel. Can you please take a moment to talk about yourself, introduce yourself, and share with us what your role in the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills and the Stronger BC Future Ready Action Plan is all about?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. It's great to be here today. My name is Rachel Franklin. I'm the Executive Director of the Strategic Projects Office with the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills. We used to be known as Advanced Education and Skills Training. So we've had a recent name change with a terrible acronym of PSFS, which you just cannot pronounce at all. Our ministry works a lot, of course, with the public and private post-secondary institutions in the province, but I'm working with the Workforce Development and Skills Training Division of the ministry, which focuses a lot on the labor market needs of the province and some of the challenges that we're facing there. I have about 15 years in government, and I've had the opportunity to work on lots of major projects, policy development and legislation. So this has been quite an interesting project to be working on lately, which is the launch of the Stronger BC Future Ready Action Plan. I'll maybe take this time to just have a couple opening pieces about the action plan there. This was announced back in the beginning of the month, so May 2nd. We had a big launch event with the Premier and our Minister, Selena Robinson. And essentially what the Future Ready Action Plan is doing is looking at strategic investments that the province can make in skills training across the province. It's a big investment. So we're looking at just in the core plan, $480 million over 3 years. And if you include some of the more connected but not core pieces, that's as high as $1.4 billion invested into skills training generally. That 1.4 would include things like investments in student financial aid and student housing, which are a big part of the picture in getting people trained up. The ministry led an engagement process last spring, We engaged about 800 individuals across the province, including a lot of business owners, a lot of members of industry, as well as educational partners, regional and Indigenous partners as well. And we really heard three main pieces. So we heard that there are more jobs than workers out there right now. The field has really changed and employers are not finding people to fill the jobs that are out there. We also heard that people need the right kind of training. So there's a lot of availability out there, but there's a sense that people are not necessarily going the route that is most needed in the province. So people need to know what the right sorts of training are to be able to succeed in some of the high demand occupations right now. And then finally, we heard a lot about technology, so that a rapidly changing economy really requires new tools and technology for both employers and workers to be able to adapt. And that innovation is really critical to reducing the labor demand and meeting the rapidly changing world of work that we see in front of us. That engagement led to the development of the Future Ready Action Plan, which is a group of many different initiatives. So it's not one thing, it's over 20 different pieces that, while working together, are trying to get at as much as we can in government, the full picture of the skills and workforce development needs in the province right now. And it is an iterative plan. So this is the first step. It's this investment over the 3 years, and it has a number of initiatives in, but this is something government's very interested in pursuing and making sure stays up to date. So I think there would be more to come over time. I think I'll be talking a little bit more about some of the specific pieces in later questions, so I'll leave it there for now. But really, I think the Future Ready Action Plan, I'm really happy to be able to talk about it today and how it's trying to address the common challenges that we have for growing BC's workforce.
Thank you, Rachel. And really important. Bill mentioned 3 reasons that their company adapted, and Jason others. So it's nice to know there's programs out there to help companies move forward with this transition. Let's take a moment to dig a little bit deeper into the investments that have been made into technology. Bill, can you talk about some of those changes that you've made in your facilities as you've introduced new technology solutions? And has this made it safer, introduced new safety concerns?
Yeah, so we've moved from cell manufacturing. So, to produce a molding, back when I started in the industry in 2000, you had somebody cut the product to length and then stack it. Then you had somebody push it into a saw to rip it, and had a person stack it. And then we would put it in the warehouse. And then we'd take it to a molder, and somebody would unstack it into a molder. And surprise, surprise, somebody would then restack the molding on the far end. And then we'd put it in the corner, and then we'd take it to a paint line, and we'd start the process all over again. And you touch a product 5 or 6 times, and lots of folks in the plant's job was to simply move either a square piece of material or a rounded piece of material, effectively a foot or a foot and a half into a piece of equipment. And a good day was making sure that they didn't catch their fingers in any of the wheels. Today, we have automated flow that would look a lot more like, I think, probably Jason's production line, where we put raw material in one end, and the other end, a fully completed lift of moldings comes out. And as long as we didn't have any quality control issues, no one has touched the product in between. So we've invested very heavily in material handling, bundlers, labelers, stackers, and finishing equipment. It has changed the work where I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but we've probably doubled or even tripled the amount of our employees that are machine operators today on a percentage basis versus material handlers. And typically when we get folks into that job, which is a higher skill, they stay. We don't turn over material handler or operators, whereas typically we'd turn over a material handler probably in less than a year. It is a much safer environment because we've taken out, and this was our goal, to take as much of the human intervention in the production of the product out and really create folks that are monitoring the work throughout the day.
Excellent. No, really great outcomes, less opportunity for risks associated with MSIs, right? not the most interesting job, as you mentioned earlier, and, enhanced production and quality. So all check marks on all sides. So really, really, thank you for sharing. Excellent.
Yeah. And the nice part about that is the continuous improvement folks told us that it would clean the warehouse up. All that space that we were using for WIP, we can now use to generate value.
Excellent. Excellent. Jason, you were talking about how Fine Choice Foods built a brand new facility, and I had the pleasure of touring that facility. Can you tell us a bit about the choices you made in the design of the new plant, and how will this impact or affect the existing facilities in terms of upgrades and safety?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, the existing facility that's been around for 30 years plus. We have a lot of people hand rolling spring rolls, and it's been part of what has been part of the product makeup for so many years, that handmade feel, more artisan. And when we started designing the new facility, we recognized that not only did we have an aging workforce in terms of being with the company for a long time and looking to retire in the relatively near future, but it's not also the most interesting job, stood on a production line, hand rolling products. But additionally, finding more and more MSI risks in terms of that repetitive motion. So we partnered with a company in Japan to design automation around that, but to keep the same product quality and the same product feel and look in terms of that handmade feel. So it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but we managed to do that, and obviously we've been running the new facility now for a few months, and had great success with that automation. So obviously in the future, as our workforce somewhat ages out and starts to retire, and we'll find incredible challenges rehiring people that want to do that job, but also to reduce the amount of MSI risk in our business. Obviously we want to continue to do that. So I think that's how it will affect the existing facilities, that over time, looking to transition into more automation as the long tenured workforce start to think about retirement.
No, excellent reason. I mean, we know MSIs, as I mentioned at the beginning, capture a lot of the injuries in our industry, like a huge component. So any way that we can remove or reduce that risk or eliminate it, preferably, as you mentioned, through mechanization or technology adaptation, is a good shift. Because as we mentioned, other skills like overseeing equipment that we can invest in training is certainly less risk physically to people. Excellent. Rachel, well, we're seeing more companies like Fine Choice Foods and Matri invest in technology. These upgrades, though, for many cases are out of reach for especially small employers. Can you talk about some of the programs the provinces has launched to help bridge that gap? What does that process look like to help them access some of these changes?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I mean, it's a great question. I think we've heard a lot about it in government. It's not something that the program I was talking about earlier is really looking at. That's more focused on the skills training side. But government does have some programs that are coming out of my colleagues in the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation that I'll highlight. And, we know that workplaces really need to be investing in technological upgrades in order to remain competitive. And this is something that there's been a couple of interesting pieces that have come out from government lately. One earlier this year, I'll just talk about the Manufacturing Jobs Fund for a moment. So this is a new $180 million program. So it's a fund that is intended to help manufacturers modernize, innovate, and grow, and it provides some funding for capital projects that would include technology adoption. So the grants that are available through that program range in amounts, I think from about 100,000 up to 10 million, depending. And it's designed to bridge the funding gap that many manufacturers face when they're seeking to make investments in production enhancing technologies. A major objective is to invest in some of the high value, high growth manufacturing sectors in the province. One of the funding streams under that program is capital investment. So that can be used towards new infrastructure, technology, equipment, and processes. And the program would contribute about 20% of the overall eligible project costs. So it's not a full funded program, but it provides some of that buffer to help manufacturers make that investment. So that program intake is ongoing. It started in February, and the program guidelines are available online. If anybody's interested, I can provide that link at the end of the session if that helps. Secondly, there is another program in the province, just I'll highlight very quickly, which is the BC Technology Assessment Program. And this is a provincially funded program that's delivered through Canadian manufacturers and exporters. And its intention is to help manufacturers understand which technologies might be best to be investing in. So we've heard in government that a large percentage of the reason on why businesses may not invest in a technology is some uncertainty about, what the cost benefit analysis is, where are the real strategic technological investments to be made. And what this program does is connect the businesses, the manufacturers together with some assessment professionals, and they'll come out with a bit of a plan for that business and looking at the assets they already have, looking at where those investments would be really making the most sense. And that's where that funding is going. So the manufacturer comes away with really an action plan that helps them make more informed decisions and more strategic decisions on the technological investments that will have the most impact.
Thank you, Rachel. A wealth of information. So just to our audience, all those links will be included in the production of circulation to all those who have registered in this course or this webinar. So please know that you don't have to, lots of information, and thank you for that. So different pathways for individuals to begin if you're interested, and an assessment makes sense. Is it the right investment for you and your business? Moving on now on really talking about the safety impact and risk profile. So Bill, how did the risks you face affect how you approach the implementation of technology? Quite often we have some challenges with implementation and people being a critical part of that. What are some of the ways that technology has allowed you to address those risk areas? And you mentioned a really great one earlier. Is there others?
I mean, for us, the biggest risk that we've got is folks inadvertently putting their hand somewhere that their hand shouldn't be. And you can train and train and train, and you can put in blocks or processes that should make things safer. And really for us, we said, hey, how do we get the hands completely out of it? Like, we don't need hands involved in this. And some of that was going to the technology folks and us being not tied to the way we do things today, right? That is typically what has gotten my way in the past, is you go, well, hold it, we've always done it this way. I'm only prepared to let go of 50% of that or 75% and really approach it with, what would have to be true for us to be able to create a situation with this in it, in our case, nobody being involved in the process. And once we got over that hurdle, it opened up a bunch of different technology that we had said wouldn't work for us. And surprise, surprise, it did end up working for us once we changed the way that we were going to use the equipment.
Oh, that's excellent. You're absolutely right. Engineering the hazards out is the best way to eliminate the risk, right? If it's there inadvertently, hands can get caught. They do. At some point they do. Yeah. And you can only do so much administratively before, the risk still exists, like you say. So really, really good outcome. And I'm very happy to hear it's all working well for your business. Jason, has your safety committee been involved in any element of the transformation of your production methods? And if so, what does that look like? Did you bring them into the discussion along the way?
Yeah, I think the talking about the new facility, obviously, it's a different location, and as part of building that out, obviously the safety committee was was built out as part of that process. And we're involved and are actively involved in the equipment and the training and the SOPs and everything that we needed to do for it. In the current facility, of course, our health and safety committee have been around for a while. They're very involved in looking at our stats and what the potential opportunities are for improvement. Our safety committee also are actively involved in our workplace inspections. And so that again creates tools for us to get feedback. You know, what can we do better? How can we look at different areas of risk and make improvements? So, you know, absolutely they're involved in looking at when we change production methods or we change a piece of equipment, because they're ultimately the people that, one, are going to know it the best, and two, are actually going to be involved in running that piece of equipment. Just to kind of talk about a little bit what Bill touched on, you know, historically we've had a lot of the same issues, right? Like fingers in the wrong places. You know, we took a position around about 2 years ago where we brought in a guarding specialist and actually went through every piece of our equipment, an engineering guarding specialist, and looked at ways to actually take away that risk completely, or, as you know, mitigate the risk as much as possible. It's impossible to eliminate it 100%, but certainly you know, mitigate the risk. And so our safety committee were heavily involved in that and making sure that we're still functional for production, because often you can, you know, if you can overguard equipment and then it becomes, you know, impossible to use, right? It just becomes so restrictive. And so finding that balance of making sure that the guards that we put in place were both meaningful from a safety protection perspective, but also worked from just a usability, right? So yeah, of course, they're heavily involved in what we do.
Thanks, Jason. It's surprising how much you learn from those that use the equipment the most, right? And making those adaptations so that it essentially, it's a win for everybody, right? You know what is the most effective production-wise as well as safety-wise. Yeah,
people, you know, human beings are really creative, right? That's part of the challenge, right? And so you can think you're doing what's right by the equipment, right? And then you make it unusable, and the human will find a way to bypass to make it easier. And then it completely defeats the object of guarding it in the first place, right? And so you've got to go through that process of making sure that it's usable, but also protects the person, right?
That is universally true. You put in safety guarding that makes their job more difficult, they will eventually find a way to make their job easier. And you come out and you put in guarding that requires two hands to be in two very safe positions to work, and come out and find rubber bands around one of them because they can't actually do the work with both their hands there. And you put in a solution that really isn't effective.
Right. No, absolutely. You know, the engineer designing the equipment quite often doesn't really understand the outcome, right? Unless you have both there at the same time, it makes it really difficult to have a perfect outcome. So excellent. So as you both introduced new equipment, have you seen new risks, new health and safety related risks as a result of those changes to equipment? I know you've eliminated a lot, but was there anything introduced new from a health and safety perspective as a result of that equipment, like cybersecurity risks as an example? Bill.
Yeah, we have put in the blocks for that. We have had actually much larger suppliers have exactly that. The equipment's all automated. It's all plugged into the network. It's all on the internet somewhere. And we know we actually put in technology to protect ourselves from, we know a supplier that was hacked, and they basically pulled all their recipes. They hid all the recipes for making product and attempted to blackmail them to get it back, which is crazy when you think, 10 years ago that you'd be worried you couldn't turn on your equipment because somebody else had control over it. The biggest thing for us is that with the larger lines now, as opposed to having small issues, we have larger upset conditions, and people scramble to try and deal with those. And that is typically a more robust safety situation of how you're going to handle this entire piece of equipment being down. And that was a new skill set for our safety team to come together and go, okay, how do we ensure that people are informed correctly in this situation? Here's the 4 steps that have to happen in this order to ensure that we safely get the entire line back up and running. Whereas before, typically everything that you needed to know, you could see in front of your face, and one person was trained to deal with a situation versus it might be 2 or 3 people in different locations trying to get an upset condition back to normal.
Right. So new types of skills retraining. I mean, it's really looking at different skills coming together and 4 processes in one versus maybe 4 separate processes. So a perfect segue into moving into skills training. Jason, how have the new technology solutions you're planning to implement affecting your hiring needs? For example, understanding that your facilities produce 300 spring rolls per minute. Imagine that, 300 spring rolls per minute by hand. That's a lot of MSI risk. What might not be the case in the new facility. So how has that transition shaped skills training for your facility?
Yeah, I think it takes when you introduce automation and technology that's obviously more sophisticated than and more complex than just human labor. You need a different skill set of person to run that piece of equipment, right? They're no longer rolling spring rolls by hand, where and don't get me wrong, these people that we have at the current facility are extremely talented at what they do. Like, nobody wants to see me on a line rolling spring rolls because it'll all go in the garbage at the end of the line. So it's a real skill set to do that, but it takes a different skill set to run a piece of equipment with PLCs and more complex sophistication. So our hiring needs changed, right? Like we needed technicians, we needed operators that understood not the nuances of the automation, but understood how to run a piece of equipment where you're not dependent on human intervention, right? Like, and so it did require a different skill set and a different hiring strategy, which was, at the time, certainly, I feel like the labor market has changed over the last 3 or 4 months, right? Like, I feel like there has been more people available, there's more opportunities. But if you go back a year when we first started hiring for that type of skill set, it was incredibly difficult to find because there was a massive shortage of labor and a real shortage of skilled technical labor, right? And so it did change our strategy, and we've got a terrific team of people at the new facility that just have that skill set, and they just understand how to run a piece of equipment as opposed to more of a manual process.
What do you think is the reason for that change, just in now seeing more readily available labor to support your organization?
I mean, I just think, that post-pandemic, right, things are just opening up, right? Immigration's getting opened back up again, right? Like, there's more people, more new immigrants moving to the province again, which is great, because that was in my mind, especially in the food industry, right? Like, where you're reliant on a certain type of labor profile, where you do often find new immigrants take up opportunities. During the pandemic, that didn't happen, right? Like, nobody was moving and nobody was allowed to move. And I would say over the last 6 months, we've started to see that reopen up again. And I think it's created more opportunity and more availability of people.
Bill, what has been your approach for retraining for your existing staff? You talked about, adding new equipment. Can you talk about how health and safety training has fit into that process?
Sure. So we've taken a very robust process around hazard assessment. I mean, the equipment that we bought is fairly customized to what we're doing, but one of the things that we've learned is that nothing runs out of the box exactly the way that it's said to run. And in some cases, we actually have to run it a little bit differently than it was originally intended to do, which means the hazards change, the way the equipment runs is changed, the training on running it needs to be consistent or constant. And we need to create waypoints where we come back and go, hey, where are we on the scale of comfortability? out of the box, if we followed the directions, we're 100%. We've made these changes, we're 80%. How do we get back to 100% as we go forward? And it's an ongoing set of training, and particularly in the first year of implementing the new equipment. I think after that, it kind of slows down because you find your pace, you find the way that you're going to run the equipment. But that first year, it's very important that it's a consistent review and update of that hazard assessment with the folks that are running the equipment, and looking for them to be the ones to come to us and go, hey, this is what's changed. This is what we need to do.
Are you finding that your labor force easily adapts to that upskilling and retraining, or do you find it's been a challenge?
It's been a challenge. When we go from mid 1980s equipment to 2015 equipment, that's connected to the internet and it has scanners and it's sending beeps off on a phone. That's a big change for some of our older workforce. The younger workforce seems to sort of leap on it. The older folks need a little bit more time, but they get there. You have to be patient. You've made a big change, and those folks have a tremendous amount of experience that you do not want to lose as you go forward. So definitely more patience required than probably we were prepared as we started to do this process.
Absolutely. And of course, all of the different generations, right? You don't know how many have a computer at home if they're, I mean, you'd expect so, but you can't assume so, right? Does the manufacturer themselves provide any support for training at all? I'm just curious, or is that all on the employer?
No, they're usually here. Like the pieces of equipment that we install are fairly large, so they're going to do the full install, and they will stay for 4 weeks to do the training. This button does this does that. Here's the safety of it.
Yeah.
Wood is not a perfect. It's not plastic, so things change, and we have to make that. That's the experience that we want out of the team to go, hey, this is different. We're going to go adjust the parameters to run the product as we go forward. And that is always, as much as we hope it's on the manufacturer has never been the group that solves those issues for us. It's always been our workforce on the floor that solves those issues for us.
Absolutely. Huge opportunity for gathering that intelligence to help those adjustments. Absolutely. Yeah. As we can see, Rachel, this impacts the future workforce in manufacturing and has identified a gap. What new, and can talk more about the provincial programs that can help assisting manufacturing industry tap into some of these support for reskilling of workers who will be working with or alongside this new technology, as Jason and Bill has shared with us. And can those projects also include funding to address new risks through related health and safety training? Does it all apply? And can you talk through that?
Yeah, sure thing. And it's really interesting for me, being in my little government box a little bit, listening to Bill and Jason talk about the real life needs of your businesses for the skills training. I think I'll start just by a couple of existing programs that help with more of what I think Jason and Bill were talking about, like the on the job training for new technology, rather than kind of the outside reskilling in a post-secondary context, which I'll come to in a bit. But we do have in the province, the BC employer training grant, and this has been around for a while, but it is a program that allows businesses to support skills training for their workers, including training related to new technology and health and safety. And that's a program that I can certainly provide some more information for folks. The intent is really to help businesses access that type of skills training that's needed on the job for adapting to just the changing technology and the changing pieces that are coming forward. There's also a BC Community Workforce Response Grant, which looks at supporting communities experiencing workforce challenges and emerging opportunities that require occupational skills to address. So that looks at but within that program, there's an emerging priorities stream that provides funding for training in areas that support new economic development opportunities. And in some ways that could be applicable to some of this. Looking, I guess, at the post-secondary side of things, you will hear government say quite a bit that as we look forward into the future, 80% of the million new job openings that are coming over the next 10 years are going to require some amount of post-secondary education and training. And just to provide some context, that doesn't mean a degree necessarily. We have a wide range of credentials and training that are available through the post-secondary system. And one piece that government has been investing in really since the pandemic, the focus has been on micro-credentials, which is looking at kind of just-in-time, really specific and smaller focused credentials that people can go and take, usually under 12 weeks, and they provide a specific new skill or a specific area of expertise. This is something that through Future Ready Action Plan, there's additional funding for post-secondary institutions, public system in this case, to be developing more micro-credentials. And alongside that, there's what I think is a really new, exciting kind of program that government's putting on, which is called the Future Skills Grant. You may have heard of this. It was announced again about a month ago. And government is providing grants to, I would say most people in the province are eligible for this. It's a pretty wide eligibility. And it's a grant of up to $3,500 per individual to access short-term training. It's not everything. So there's a group of courses and programs that have been approved through our public system, our 25 universities, institutes, and colleges. And individuals can apply through those institutions, and their tuition is credited essentially. So you can go and take free training. And I think from the employer point of view, this is extra training that individuals can take that, the employer doesn't have to subsidize, doesn't have to pay for. The amount of, or the types of credentials that are out there are pretty wide ranging. These programs are all starting in September. So this is the first time we've done this, and there's about 400 available programs. And there are programs out there that are related to technology, to health and safety, clean energy, construction, as well as just a whole number of things that could be applicable to different workplaces. And I think as that program continues, this is starting in September, that number of eligible programs is going to change and is going to shift. And it's going to, I think government wants to be in an ongoing dialogue with our institutions and the business and industry and manufacturing sector on what kinds of programs will be most impactful. There must be a connection between a real labor market need and that credential at this point. That's part of the eligibility for the programming. So I think that's one that I think is quite, I can understand it's not necessarily on the job training, but it does have that possibility to go out and get some new training and bring it back to the workplace and bring those skills to really be able to address some of the needs that are around right now.
Well, it's nice to hear there are investments in skills training for people. I think as both Jason and Bill have indicated, really important to have these skills to help support their organizations. Jason and Bill, if I were to ask you, what prerequisite, is there a foundational prerequisite you're looking for when you are hiring and recruiting now that is different than before? And just to see how these programs would help you in seeking potential candidates with specific skills that you'd like to see coming into your organization. Jason, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't think our prerequisites have changed, right? Fundamentally. Like I said, the new facility requires a different skill set, right? But we still have the same expectations relative to understanding the importance of safety, and our orientation programs address all of that. We're actually just upgrading our training platform right now to a digital training platform, right? So away from sitting in a classroom, listening to people for 6 hours, to move into more online, digital computerized training, very tailored to our facility and to our processes, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say our fundamental requirements of what we look for in an employee has shifted that much, apart from the new skill sets required with the automated equipment.
Right. Okay. So equipment operator type,
Right.
which is still specific to your organization, but it would be helpful if the individuals have operated equipment elsewhere, right? As experience.
Yeah.
Bill, how about yourself? Are you looking for any specific additional criteria on the resume now with your adaptations in your facility?
Not on the floor. Like,
Yeah.
Production on the floor, I think it hasn't changed. Very similar to what Jason said. Where we do have, maybe an opportunity when we have folks that are making that transition from the floor to an office, like they're moving their career up, and people who they don't have that post-secondary education, micro, Excel courses, production scheduling courses, that kind of experience where we get some outside help in doing that, I think would be something that would value to us.
Excellent. So that micro-credentialing with 12-week courses would help with those transitions then for those individuals.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, moving into change management now. A couple of weeks ago, we presented a webinar on leading and managing change, which we talked here at length of to Jason and Bill and their facilities. I know that this has to be a significant consideration when we look at the design of current and future automated systems. Bill, can you talk in more detail about how you handled this change management? You've been around almost 100 years, and from that, quite significant changes, as you mentioned. And can you talk about some of the lessons learned? What would you advise others going through this? And what would you advise they do differently, if anything?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of things that we would do differently. Now, I just want to start and say the company has been around for 100 years, and there's a lot of gray in this beard, but I have not been around for 100 years, the way that you posed that question.
Yeah.
There's two big things for us on the change management. One is getting the end goal, the very clear destination, clear in the minds of the folks that are going to see the change, because when they only see bits and pieces of it, they struggle with where we're going, right? And it creates angst, right, in folks of, hey, is the intention here, we have 100 employees and we're trying to go to 30 employees? Or is the intention in our case that we'd like to have 100 employees, we can only get 80, and we'd like the 80 folks that are here to have a better experience, and get that really clear, and really clear on what the investment is going to do for them. The second, the big lesson for us is to expect this is going to take longer, and just pushing harder is not going to make it go faster in the plant. Change is hard, particularly if you haven't done it. If you haven't been doing sort of micro changes, and maybe if you looked at our business over the last 5 years, we've been probably doing that. Previous to that, there'd be no change in process for a decade. And then boom, we're changing everything and expecting people to get that in their minds. And in the 6-week plan that you laid out, that everything was going to be running in that 6 weeks, I think you've got to give yourself a much wider window to really get true change worked through the facility.
So really giving people time, giving as much advanced, notice and warning as possible, providing a bit of a visual. Can you over communicate, or from your experience?
No, I mean, we've hired lots of communication experts, and the experts have told us that you will tire of telling the message before people are tired of hearing the message.
Good point.
So that's good. And one of the things that you do want to include that group in the planning process and get the feedback from the folks, so that you don't do similar to what Jason was talking about in the guarding, actually create something from an office away that you think is better. And the first time somebody's running this equipment, they look at you and go, oh my goodness, right? And I think you also want to make sure that the folks on the plant also understand that we're not hitting the go button and we expect that it's perfect. I had an old manager that used to say all the time, you cannot steer a parked car, right? So now once you start moving and you go, oops, hey, we're going to make this adjustment. We're going to make this adjustment. And that's normal. That's okay. That's part of the process. Creates a little more faith in the team, in the equipment that you put in place.
Yeah, I guess setting expectations, to your point, knowing it's not going to be a perfect startup, right? It's going to have shifts and bumps and along the way, right? I think that's just setting those expectations and then following up, really important. How long in advance did you plan for that change management? Was it?
So our equipment is 16 to 18 months to order it. So as we were ordering, we brought everybody in and we created some excitement behind, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's the milestones. We kept them in the loop of, the equipment shipping, it's coming in. We got the folks not surprised. So we've probably had a year and a half, in some cases 2 years, to get everybody prepared.
Oh, that's great. It's great to know you had that level of time to be able to do that. And then over communication is not possible. So that's really good pointers. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Jason, knowing that your facilities are moving towards the adoption of more automation and technology, have these changes impacted your existing teams? I mean, you mentioned those that do the work traditionally versus those now that it's now automated in your new plant. How has it changed the overall work experience and workplace health and safety changes? Oh, sorry, Jason, you're on mute. Good old mute.
I think I've got this figured out after 2 years of the pandemic. Yeah, it's different by facility, right? Like the new facility is new equipment and new people, right? So there's when we hired those people and they joined us, then we'd already, that equipment was in place and it was starting to get commissioned and they went through a lot of training. And to Bill's point, I think, when it comes to change management, it's not everything happens perfectly, like Bill said, right? Like we don't turn the machine on and we get, perfect spring rolls and perfect number of spring rolls on the day that you turn it on. And it takes weeks, if not months, to fine tune everything. And I think having relative patience and communicate with the employees around, we're learning this, we're making changes, we're making improvements as we go along, because some of this equipment was, was leading edge, right? Like it was designed by a company in Japan in collaboration with us, and it wasn't just a piece of equipment off a shelf, let's say. So there was some learning associated with that. The current facility, the experience for the employees, for those folks, hand rolling spring rolls, it's a social environment for them as well, right? Like it's not just a workplace, but it's a social thing. And so significant change management, would be required in the future to change that. And that's why, like we're looking ahead, because we do have this aging workforce, and we do have people that are going to be retiring, and it's going to be our necessity is going to be, it's more difficult to replace those people as opposed to instead of looking for an opportunity to eliminate people. It's more about, can we replace those people when they retire, right? So that'll be a different strategy that we have to use, right? But yeah, I mean, I think anything that you change, if you can involve people, get their input and understand what improvement it's going to make up front, I think is super beneficial.
Yeah, you've made some really interesting points, Jason. It's a bit of that social connection and pride, I would think. You're making a food product, right, that people consume, and I think there'd be a level of pride attached to that in that work as well. You also mentioned that immigration is part of what you have in terms of SEEK, in terms of labor for your organization. Are you finding that in many cases where English may be a second language, there's challenges or you have to think differently in upskilling for that demographic?
Yeah, definitely. And Fine Choice is an interesting example of this, because the company's been around for 36, 37 years, and if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, the workforce was predominantly Chinese, right? And so regardless of whether there's English as second language involved in this, there was a high demographic of the same language, right? So it's easy to manage that. Well, as we've grown over the last 3 to 4 years, our cultural melting pot has changed completely, right? We've got many different cultures now, very diverse organization, and so makes it more challenging. And so things like training and manuals and SOPs and everything that we do now has to be multi-language. Part of the reason we're looking at this digital training platform is that it's easier to use translation services through digital platforms than it is to have every document paper translated and rewritten and everything. So absolutely, I think we now have all of our things written in 3, maybe 4 languages now, right?
Do you find that those platforms are effective? Because sometimes direct translation just doesn't deliver the same message. Do you find that they're pretty good, or is there any oversight and review that needs to happen just to make sure it's translating precisely in the way that it's intended?
Yeah, I think anybody that's kind of dipping their toes into AI and ChatGPT and stuff like that is seeing the challenges that comes with automated processes, bots reaching out and the language not being quite right. So yeah, I think the translation service works really well, assuming that you do an end line review with somebody who's proficient in that language, right? And so that's ultimately what we do, is we have it translated, and then it gets reviewed, and subtle changes are made if necessary, right? Because even with different languages, there are different dialects, right? So a word can have a different, looking at Cantonese or Mandarin as 2 different languages, for example, they're very, very similar, but they can have different meanings. And so, yes, we are doing like end of line reviews once the translation is done.
Excellent. Okay, moving forward now, really talking about the mental health impacts. And I think we've kind of touched on that for sure. I mean, any change is going to impact us psychologically. So Jason, while increased production is always a key goal in manufacturing, to what degree did the stress and challenges of the past few years impact your decisions around technology investments and upgrades? Did these stressors also impact the timing for implementation? I mean, you mentioned the pandemic, and there were there certainly was more than just the pandemic that's impacted our industry. And has it weighed into your decisions up front or not? Just looking at the wealth of challenges that our industry has faced, pandemic, we had forest fires, we've had the floods, we've had supply chain issues. I mean, there's been a wealth of challenges. Did the timing impact that, and really looking at it from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, I think the stresses that we've all experienced over the last 3 years with those examples that you've talked about expedited our thought process in making the changes and specifically building out the second plant. We were as a food processing company, and I think for many food processing companies, the effect of the pandemic created additional burden on us servicing food to our customers, right? Where restaurants closed down and people weren't able to eat anymore. Well, all of that stress then got placed on food processors to manufacture enough food to service grocery aisles. And as opportunistic as that may sound in terms of just the growth of the company, it comes with a tremendous amount of stress and burden to run more hours, run more days, run more lean, especially with labor challenges and all that kind of stuff. And so it really expedited our investigation into putting a second facility in, because we were redlining on capacity for 2 years, and that that plays hard on the mental health side, right? Like if you're working 6 or 7 days a week, working extra hours, like that's tough. And so we decided to go with the new facility, and then when we were designing the new facility, we said, well, this is really our opportunity to make the processes as friendly as possible and as automated as possible, right? And so absolutely, yeah, it definitely has been a challenging time that's made us think about things differently, right?
No, absolutely. And then of course, there's the executive, level as well, where there's only one of you, right? So that's always into all these different parts that come together, making sure that the timing is able to be done within the frame that of the planning, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've got an amazing team around me, so I'm very blessed with the people that I work alongside. So even though there's only one of me, there's a multitude of talented people in the team that drive this, right? Like this is a team environment that we work in, right?
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Bill, can you talk about the impact on your management and team from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, the interesting thing as we have implemented more technology, it creates more data and more readily available data and more readily available remote data. So our leaders all have the production information fed to their phones.
Huh.
And what we started to catch on was that they'd be interacting with that data at 11:30 at night, before they went to bed, or they'd wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and for some reason choose to flip their phone over and see a couple of little red buttons on it and start to interact in the middle of the night. Or on the Saturday, as they were at their kids' game, they'd start to interact. And we really needed to sit down and help train them as to when they should be dipping into that information and when they needed to let it go. Because effectively now they were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that was draining on the entire team. It's good to have the data. You use it in the right way. It's quite effective and allows them to step in when they need to. But they didn't have the skill set to decide where that was, and we had to help them with that, right?
So do you have then those boundaries, or do you have a process around that now? Is that where you've kind of...
Yeah, we put some boundaries in place, and then we had some honest conversations with, we'll call it, not everybody went to the extreme that some folks did. And I mean, we have very talented people in the plants that can run the plant on the weekend. And when I ran a plant 20 years ago, there was none of that. I had to trust them. And it actually helps the team on the weekend grow because they have to make some of those bigger decisions, but they know that if they're really in trouble, that they have that opportunity, they have that link. And it's experience, I think, that gets folks and comfortability to go, oh, that's the line, I don't need to do that. And I think over the last 6 or 7 months, we've got to a much more balanced place with the management team of when they can let it go and when they don't let it go. And particularly on vacations, we have implemented on vacations that you turn it off and you have a text. And if somebody really, really needs you, they will text you. And actually, look, I was just away on vacation for 7 days and I received exactly, for the first time ever, no texts from anybody. And I'll tell you what, I appreciated that I got that 7 days to just not be involved in making moldings.
No, that's really excellent points. Balance, right? It's really looking at balance and then trusting, your teams to make those, as you mentioned, make those decisions that they need to make, right?
Yeah.
You have it as a bit of a backup, the information if you need to, but you've entrusted the decisions to the people overseeing the work, right? Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Well, we're nearing the end of the discussion. So really now looking at reflection for Jason and Bill, if you were to undergo the process of implementing technology again, which I expect is in all of our future and your future, would you have done something different? And what would you have done differently and why? Jason.
You
Sorry.
muted yourself again, Jason.
Muted again, that good old mute, I tell you.
Terrible. I'm awful today. I don't know if I'd do anything specifically different. I think the one thing that we reflected upon was I think we underestimated the challenges at the time relative to things like supply chain, like getting the equipment across the water, for example, right? Like we had this equipment built in Japan, right? And, we needed it as soon as possible. We were commissioning the plant, right? We needed it, across to Vancouver as quickly as possible. And we didn't anticipate some of the things like, well, it ordinarily takes 30 days on a boat to get from, Japan to Vancouver. But right now, because of the shortage of boats and shortage of port workers, and it might get to the port in 30 days and then it might sit there for 60 days and you can't get access to it. And we ended up flying that equipment from Japan, which was insanely expensive and not anticipated, right? So I think if I do something different again, I think I'd just anticipate some of the challenges, and maybe those challenges were very specific for that time, right, that we were going through, and then just the learning curve of a new piece of equipment that was designed very quite specifically for us, and the learning curve of having technicians come from Japan, and that communication gap with the Japanese technicians and installing it and training and stuff like that, right? So I don't think I'd do anything different in terms of the equipment we chose and how we chose to do it, but I think just some learnings from what we saw.
So are you building those contingencies into the future? I mean, you mentioned the supply chain, not knowing what the future looks like. As you mentioned, will we anticipate that for the future? Well, we don't know. Is that something you'd build more into the planning, is contingency?
Yeah, I think, food processing equipment in general can be anywhere from 6 to, call it 14 months, right? In terms of, making the equipment. I think anything that we're doing looking forward is we're extending those timelines out and saying, well, we need to, if we're going to do something, we need to order it maybe, 2 or 3 months earlier than we ordinarily would do, to make any adjustments. Now, we may not have the same supply chain obstacles to deal with that we had, last year. So it may be different, but yeah, we're thinking more meaningfully around timelines now.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Bill.
Yeah, I agree with Jason. One of the things that I would set a less aggressive startup timeframe, a more ramped up. It's going to take us, we're not getting to where we expected to be in 30 days. It's really 60 or 90 days to get to where we want. We've always spent a bunch of time in the development of sending our people to the factories where things are being made, because they have the expertise as we're, designing corners and speeds and whatnot. I think one of the things that we've learned is that it's worth the expense of bringing the engineer, in our case, it would be Germany and Italy, to look at how we're running it today. Because sometimes communicating, even with videos, they don't see everything they need to see. And in the plant, they see something. And then in a lot of cases, it's not a big change. Oh, we need to do X. And it ends up smoothing out that startup of the facility, if you can get them in and see what you're doing today as they're designing the equipment. It's hard to get it right from 5,000 kilometers away.
Right. So just planning and bringing them in and taking some time and really understanding where things are in the 3D on-site. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. And Rachel, how is the province responding to the changing economy and workforce and labor supply gaps across sectors? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of what I've already mentioned is a sign that government really is hearing from employers in particular, but people around the province and in all sectors, that we have a problem that needs to be addressed here. We have employers in all sectors and regions of the province are really struggling to fill positions, struggling to find the people that have the right skills. And the Future Ready Action Plan that I've mentioned, it's a step. It's quite a historic investment, looking at $500 million in one budget, all towards skills development and training. I don't think we can understate how much and how significant that really is. So it's a great step towards addressing the labor market shortages, the changing economy, and there's a lot in the plan. I think that I won't go through and list a million other programs, but the way that it has been designed is focusing on people. So it is a people-focused plan, and looking in particular at 5 major groups. with, I think, employers, so not just businesses, but employers generally as the foundation in the whole plan. So the 5 groups, we really have a number of initiatives looking at people that are needing to access post-secondary education, maybe for the first time, maybe later in their careers and looking to gain new skills. So there's initiatives like a doubling of financial student aid to allow more people to be able to access post-secondary. We're looking at more seats in post-secondary institutions for really high needs areas like tech. I think the expansion of tech related student spaces is really significant. The government has made a commitment for 3,000 more, and that's already been expanded by about 3,000 over the last several years. And that's really a recognition that there's just a lot of room to ensure that we have people trained up in that area. We're also looking at making connections like between students who are in high school, the K-12 system, with employers, and looking at some work integrated learning investment. So trying to make those connections between people accessing post-secondary education and the employers. I think people looking to reskill is the second group, and that's a lot of what I've mentioned already. I will mention briefly a manufacturing specific program that we have, which is was announced a couple of weeks ago, I think, which is the Youth in Manufacturing Initiative. And this is one where that's coming out of our Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, that is connecting youth with manufacturing careers. So I think this is this recognition that the manufacturing workforce is one that we need a lot of development in. We know that there's lots of people that are reaching retirement age that may be leaving the workforce, and that there's thousands of new jobs being created, and that vacancies are also at a high right now. So I think part of this program is acknowledging that youth don't always have they don't always recognize that manufacturing is a career path that is available to them. There might not be those supports readily available within the high school system, within the education system to point to this as a career. So this program is really trying to make those connections, and it'll affect about 500 BC youth, and providing short-term work placements within the manufacturing industry.
Excellent.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is there room in your plan just for adaptation, just as we roll it out, if getting feedback is that built in?
Yeah, it's. I think at this point, we don't have an established process in place yet, but absolutely, I think it's intended to be an evergreen plan. So we're looking at engagement, making sure that we're hearing from different sectors across the province, different groups across the province on what's important to them, and making sure that the province continues to pay attention to those things.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason, Bill, and Rachel, for your insights. And once again, thank you to our allied partner, TextMed Services, for helping make today's town hall possible. If you have any questions for the panel today, please submit it to the Q&A. We'll address as many as we can before our time is up. And really looking at a question here from the audience. If you were to share one thing for business leaders who are at the start of their journey in adopting technology, what would it be? Bill.
Patience. And I mean, technology is not like a solution in a box, right? At least it hasn't been for us, right? Where you just buy X and it now works, right? That's key. The second thing is to include the folks that are doing the manual process in the design, right? And the issues. And you get a better process out of it, right? You end up automating the right stuff, and you get better adoption of those folks into the new roles when they have some ownership of the fact that they were involved in this technology, even if it was just a little bit of what you were doing.
Excellent insights. No, really, really thank you for that. Jason, anything from you on that?
I think really similar patience, but also try and preempt some of the challenges in advance, right? Like be prepared to know that it's more complex, right? There's more
Right.
there's more complexity to the equipment, where if it's a technical automated piece of software, for example, there's glitches that are going to happen,
Yeah.
right? Try and plan for them, and understand some of the risks and opportunities through the process. But yeah, just some of the learnings that we had, right?
No, excellent. And all, like Will mentioned, patience, right? Expecting the world, but you just got to take those steps, right? You can't skip them. So really excellent insights. Rachel, how would micro accreditations work alongside the Red Seal and other apprenticeship programs that currently exist?
Yeah, that's a great question. They're intended to be supplementary, so there's no replacement of the existing skills training or Red Seal programming that is really important to part of our skills training programs in the province. A micro credential is intended to be kind of on top of that. So an example I could provide is if there's somebody trained in mechanics, for example, but they would like to get some like automobile mechanics, and they'd like to get some understanding of how to start working on electric vehicles. There's a micro credential available for that EV maintenance. So it's adding, a little bit of an area of expertise on top of those existing trades training pieces.
Is there a full list of the micro credentialing courses? There is. Okay, excellent.
There is. Yeah, I'm happy to find that. I can even just put it in the chat here if that would be helpful.
Oh, that would be excellent. And we'll, of course, circulate it to all of our viewers as well. Second question, Bill, what do you think may be some of the health and safety concerns that manufacturers will be seeing in the future? Asking you to peer into your crystal ball.
Ooh, well, that's a good question. So, for us, as we've been doing our process, our air, I'm trying to think of the right word here, is every time we go to put in a new process, there is a new government agency that is interested in what we are doing to the environment. Not for, like, I think it's a good thing, but we're not prepared. Like, we're getting asked questions as like, we hadn't even thought about that. Whether it's water, whether it's air, what are the accreditations of the raw material that, that was fine 5 years ago. Now, 5 years later, things have changed. And how do we keep up to speed to all of those things as we go forward?
Yeah, you've made a really good point. I mean, the speed of change is happening in so many different areas, like you mentioned, environment, health and safety, other areas that continue to evolve quicker than perhaps we learn about them and then implement them. I mean, it takes a lot of people to really understand what's happening if there's a lot of pieces attached to that policy. And it's not easy. It's not easy for organizations to do that, especially for small business when you have individuals wearing, multiple hats.
So you look at where we were 30 or 40 years ago, most of the waste from our facility, which is just wood dust, went to the dump, right? And it was inexpensive, and actually the dump used it to build the roads in the dump, so everybody was happy. Today, none of it gets in the dump. All of it is either used as energy, it's produced as energy, or in some cases, it's actually used. In Alberta, we use our waste, goes to the oil fields to suck up residual oil on the ground, and then is used to burn power. So it's, and our dust, or our chips, are actually coming from MDF, which is already recycled. So by the time they made power out of it, this product had been recycled 4 times. It had 4 separate uses on its life. And you would never have seen that as being the chain of where your waste would have gone 20 years ago.
Excellent. That's a really good example. Thank you, Bill. Jason, what do you think maybe some of the health and safety concerns that the food industry will be seeing in the future?
I think the number of risks will reduce, right, as automation comes in, but I think the severity of those risks will increase, right? So with automated technology, where there is no human intervention, I think it creates a higher severity of risk. Like let's use AI in motor vehicles as a perfect example, right? So the assumption is that with the building of vehicles that will just drive themselves, that you eliminate some risks, some human error risks in the environment, right? But the risks that still do appear out there, the consequences of those risks will be much more severe, right? So I think what we need to be careful of is choose our automation and technology really carefully and ensure that there is a way of validation or a way of human verification or intervention that's still available to make sure that it remains safe, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned engineering versus administrative, controls, right? When you talk about administrative controls, it's people, right? They're involved in that. Engineering is more, it's engineered out primarily, but there's a risk to that. Like you say, when it fails big, and the consequences are significant.
Right.
When you plan those changes, how far out in the future are you planning those changes? 2 years, 4 years, 5 years? And are you considering the potential landscape of regulatory change at the same time?
Yeah, I think we try to do as much as we can with a 2 to 3 year kind of outlook.
Yeah.
But we all know that things change, with a flip of a coin, right? Like we would have thought, 3.5 years ago that we'd be going into a pandemic, right? Like they're the things that we just don't know, right? And so I think we try and forecast what things are going to look like. We try and use, engineering modeling to figure out what's the next step that we need to do. But always with the thought that things could shift so quickly, right? It's so difficult to predict. But yeah, 2 to 3 years out is what we try and look for in terms of when we're looking at manufacturing processes. Yeah.
Do you tend to look at Canada for that regulatory kind of threshold, or do you look elsewhere? I mean, you mentioned get your the machinery from Japan. I mean, where are you seeing that threshold for your business?
Well, I mean, everything that we do has to comply with, provincial and federal, Canadian regulations, right? Like CSA standards and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
We try to, when we're looking at equipment, we try to look at what I would call advanced markets, right? So Europe and Japan is a perfect example, right? Where technology is a little further advanced. It's a little more sophisticated than it is in North America in many ways. But that creates other additional challenges, right? Is that sometimes we're not ready for some of those complexities, right? Or the spare parts are not readily available locally to be able to manage and keep a piece of equipment running, right? And so a lot of it, we try to do as much of it as local as possible we can, but we do look at technology outside of Canada. Yeah.
Excellent. Bill, how about yourself?
Yeah, most of our technology is European technology, and the processes that they drive. We make moldings over there. They make a lot of wood windows and doors, and they've had the labor issues that we're having today. They had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Wow. So we've been able to crib a lot off of what they're doing. It does, as Jason said, we got to keep a lot of spare parts here. We have a massive list of these. We have to have one of these or two of these in different locations, because we can't wait even 2 days to get something from Europe, and that's just sort of the cost of the capital cost of putting this kind of equipment in place.
Thank you, Bill, Jason, and Rachel. We're going to have to stop here with a quick few thank yous, some announcements, and a short video featuring some local manufacturers. Really, once again, thank you to our esteemed panel for sharing your insights and thoughts with all of us here today, and to you all for hearing the conversation. If you're still thinking of a question, please forward it, and we will make sure that you get the answer. Thank you once again to our town hall sponsored allied partner TextMed Services. If you don't have your tickets yet for the Safety Pinnacle Awards Gala, there's still time this week. So please don't miss this once in a year chance to celebrate excellence in health and safety, connect with your peers, and of course, get inspired. On June 13th, join us as well for our next webinar on 5S to build safer workplaces with Lean Master Black Belt Bruce Ennis from Associate Member of the Manufacturing Export Enhancement Cluster. With our AGM coming up this afternoon, in closing today, we're excited to share with you all the video highlights of working with our member manufacturers and food processors over the past year. 2022 was the year of transformation. After 2 years of opening and closing, we were able to offer more on-site support and services and training, launched our Pinnacle Awards in person, which was really a way to really engage our members and celebrate their success.
We are now working on an approach that provides an annual action plan around 4 pillars: resource development, training, consultative services, and of course the advocacy work that we do on behalf of employers to help them get whatever it is that they need. Certainly we saw how our advocacy really supported members through the pandemic.
We have used Manufacturing Safety Alliance quite a bit more than previously, and I think part of that is they have a basket of resources that we can pull from. We can go to for a lot of different things rather than going to multiple different vendors.
We are really focusing on how can we support the members on exactly what they need, and then bringing in the expertise. We've really spent a lot of time in recruiting some phenomenally talented people that have expertise from industrial hygiene, mental health, and ergonomics, because those are the real needs of employers today, and we can provide that on-site consultative services to really help them find unique solutions on-site.
We've done a lot of work with the Manufacturing Safety Alliance to improve health and safety. We use them for our gap analysis. They would come in and help us out with all that. We just did air testing, so they have a hygienist on staff. We chose the Safety Alliance because the hygienist actually came in, saw what we were going to be doing, and then knew exactly what they needed to do, where they were going, the whole idea, and then came back and did the testing.
Manufacturers that we've worked with from 2017 to 2021 has seen a 26% reduction in the injury rate. We've also seen a 15% reduction in the serious injury rate. And of course, at the end of the successful results, we see a successful financial impact.
We partnered with MSABC on really understanding on where we can actually complement the training program we have with actually the things that we're missing. It's been very successful for us to really partner with them.
Seeing the growth of our training programs has been impressive, and it certainly gets us excited about what we have to offer for our members, but also what we're going to offer our members in the future.
Factors Group has utilized a lot of the training resources through the Manufacturing Safety Alliance. We subscribe to their online learning portal, which offers a variety of online courses from combustible dust to confined space awareness.
We've made it a point to work closely with MSA since 2018, basically utilized every program that MSA has to offer.
One of the most positive changes over the last couple of years is that our team has been overwhelmed with a real need from our members. There is a real shortage of safety support or trained professionals in this area. And so we've been really seen as a solid resource for members. And it's really been quite exciting to see how much work we've been able to do. We're removing those orders, we're getting them situated to get ready for OC Core certification, seeing them to get certified, and seeing the positive changes in the workplace.
When we convey the message that we reach out to the Alliance for some help, some resources, the employees know that we're taking things serious and they're expecting an outcome. It enables us to ensure that the workers have the buy-in from ourselves and that we are advocating for a better safety culture.
Our goal is to have enough qualified health and safety professionals to help support industry successfully, with the right education, skills, and experience. So I'm inspired to know that we play a role in that to help industry, and leading by example is critical. To know that we are there to support industry to help build
thriving, sustainable, psychological, and physical healthy workplaces.
Thank you all. Visit us online anytime for help or to access our full library of webinars, resources, and training. Watch for an email tomorrow with a link to the recording today's session and a quick survey to share your feedback and topic ideas. Thank you all again for joining us today.